Okay, here goes. I wrote some comments last night on the Black Triangle UFO sighting that was August 28th, 2007. And thought I might explain my ideas on the Time Distortion Experience. To make a long story short, you can look at those other videos. The information will be below. I saw this huge black triangle from the roof of a building in the middle of the night during a lunar eclipse, and had a video machine running on the moon. And later, when I listened to the audio portion, realized that I had all sorts of memories that didn't fit into the time allotted on the tape. They fit just in a field, which was very strange. And the machine didn't show signs of being powered down or powered up, and the shadow moves continuously across the moon. Could all be faked, but to me, it was unexplainable how that could be, because I was there. I had the memories. You'll just have to take my word for it. The whole event prompted me to start doing research on what could this possibly be. I had never heard of Black Triangle UFOs before. Never heard of them. And when you're talking about UFOs, where do you find good research? All sources are equally suspect. So where do you go to find research on UFOs? At the time I looked on the internet, there wasn't much on YouTube. But I did find some things related to other things. And all books are equally suspect. There is no authoritative university, Cambridge, Yale, Princeton, MIT, that verifies, oh yes, this is a flying saucer from Andromeda. And like I said, I'd never even heard of black triangles before. So I read a lot of things, a lot of speculative stuff, more or less believable. It's quite a field. Now there's a lot of interesting information on YouTube about UFOs and aliens and that whole abduction encounter experience. And I don't know what to say about that. However, my explanation of the time distortion experience is based on a very few sources. And it's for entertainment purposes only. The sources are questionable at best, so don't get too carried away, not too serious. But if you can relax your guard and you can think a little bit and speculate, could be an explanation that is not phantasmagorical or magical or mystical, but it's a real physics kind of explanation. The three sources that I used to make an explanation in physics were first, The Grand Design by Stephen Hawking, his newest book. And I didn't even use the book, but just basically the summary of the book. And I've read other Stephen Hawking books. I've listened to some tapes, so I'm familiar with the author. I think this is a pretty legitimate source, and his description of the physics of the universe is fairly reliable and authoritative. So Stephen Hawking's The Grand Design, that's probably the only really legitimate source I used. The other two were, and I have this book, Earth, Pleiadian Keys to the Living Library by Barbara Marciniak. Never heard of her before. Found this book in a discount bookstore, new books for sale. Very intriguing. You can find a lot of references to Barbara Marciniak on YouTube and a lot of talks and audio lectures. Basically, she trans-channels spirit entities from the Pleiadian star system. And the Pleiadian is what appears to be a grouping of 7 stars called the Seven Sisters in mythology. And apparently there's an intelligent entities centered in that area that can communicate telepathically and transport themselves telepathically across the universe. This is a more questionable resource. Nevertheless, it's a very interesting read, and a lot of Barbara Marciniak's books and lectures are very interesting and thought-provoking. And the last resource that I used to help me make this description was Bob Lazar, a video interview. And I've got the interview on DVD, but you can see copies of it here on YouTube easily. And Bob Lazar claimed to work for Area 51, for actually at another area where they were back engineering UFOs. And he had a brief description of the propulsion of these crafts as being gravity drives. And it sounds pretty reasonable based on the descriptions and the film footage that exists that some people speculate is authentic. So this is our little adventure to try and describe how time distortion event could occur, assuming that these sources are reliable, just for fun. Well, the whole key is the gravity-time link. And our understanding now is that gravity influences time, that really gravity is more like distortions of the fabric of the universe that cause potentials of movement to occur. And we've all seen those graph diagrams. Now, the one thing I got from Stephen Hawking that I thought was interesting was that most likely we live in a universe that has 3 dimensions of time and 9 dimensions of space. Now, we have no understanding what that could possibly mean, because it does not correspond to our personal experience at all, at least no one I've ever met. I feel pretty reliably like I live in a universe that has 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time, if you call that a dimension. Intuitively, that's my experience. Now, curiously, in the Barbara Marciniak book, and she describes how the universe is unfolding in a kind of phantasmagorical way. But she makes the same statement, absolutely unrelated to Stephen Hawking, that we live in a universe with 3 dimensions of time and 9 dimensions of space. When I read that, I was kind of like, well, that's quite a surprise. It was a unique correspondence, which really doesn't prove anything. But let's assume that's the case. Let's assume that's how the universe is, and that gravity does affect time, and it affects our understanding of time and space. And because we live on the planet Earth, at the size we live at, we don't experience quantum phenomenon at our scale of living, but the quantum phenomenon really do exist. And we're starting to figure out what the peculiarities of quantum phenomenon are. And this is an exciting new branch of physics that probably won't be resolved anytime soon. So we have the few ideas that these ships may be powered by gravity drives, some type of force that we don't understand that actually affects the gravity fields that permeate the universe. And by causing aberrations or exploiting weaknesses in these gravity fields, they're able to fall through gravity potentials and get a tremendous amount of energy. And this is why they can shoot to escape velocity in a few seconds. This is why they hover. And this is what Bob Lazar explained, the curious behavior, why they are all bobbing around as they're just falling into gravity potentials. Whereas inside the ship, they're in a different gravity and time space, so they don't feel any disturbance of bobbing around, like they look like a little teacup on a string. which they may very well be in many of those movies. But the basic idea is under extreme speed or under extreme gravity, we may experience the world differently than we do. At our scale of existence, we have 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time. But if we move close to the speed of light, that changes. And whereas our apparent time seems to move the same way to all other observers, time is stopped for us, and the world keeps on going. So time is related to gravity, and it's related to speed. Now, if you happen to be underneath a huge ship that was powered by gravity drive, it will probably have one driver pointing right at the center of the Earth. Because if it's pointing at the center of the Earth, it's neutralizing that great gravitational attraction. Now, if you happen to be in that beam of influence pointing at the Earth directly below the craft, it's difficult to say whether you would have the same experience of time and space as under ordinary conditions. Maybe under extreme gravity or speed, those 3 dimensions of time come apart. Now remember, if we have 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time, but really it's 12. In our experience, those extra dimensions may be collapsed. The extra dimensions of time, all 3, may be collapsed, so we move equally along all 3 dimensions. And you can think of this as a 3-dimensional Cartesian graph with a diagonal line. Each of the dimensions of time is one of the x, y, z. The diagonal line moving through it is the experience we have, moving equally along all the dimensions of time, functionally just 1 dimension of time. But maybe under extreme speed, extreme gravity, this separates out. And what the effect of this would be is we may move along 1 dimension of time. We may, instead of moving diagonally, just move like this. So in 2 dimensions, time has stopped. But for us, we're still moving in time through a stopped dimension of time, because we're now moving perpendicular to this plane of these 2 dimensions of time, and we're stopped. It is stopped. We're moving from a point that's stopped in time, but we're still moving on the 3rd axis of time. And this is a way to explain these time distortion events, where something somehow under extreme gravity or other physical anomalies, a person, a observer, all of a sudden starts moving along 1 axis of time, whereas the other 2 are fixed. I might say that time distortion anomalies are really common in the world literature. Time distortion stories of lost time or gained time are very common in the human fairy tale mythological story record. Irish fairy tales, Asian stories, and culture stories of a lot of cultures have these time distortion events. And it could be a very real physical phenomenon that we just don't experience because we're mostly just walking around this planet, walking around on the surface of this rock we call planet Earth that's circling the sun. But under extreme conditions, we may experience these time distortion events if we move at the speed of light or under some other situation. So that is my explanation based on Stephen Hawking and Barbara Marciniak's universe that has 3 dimensions of time, 9 dimensions of space, based on the quantum mechanic idea of things operate at different scales, based on the idea that time and gravity and speed are related and affect each other, based on the research of Bob Lazar and that popular talk he gave on back engineering space drive, and just on speculation. This is one small speculative idea, but a real explanation for something that otherwise would be just magical, mystical, dreamlike fantasy, and I don't think that's the case. I think there's always an explanation somehow, and this is an interesting explanation. And as we move off the planet and into space in succeeding generations, we'll know better about time and space and gravity and the universe. All right. Thank you. Have a great day.